Great. Well, welcome to everybody to Sangha Night tonight. Especially welcome to those people who are on the urban retreat, which I imagine there are a few here. This talk, which is on true entrusting and the wisdom of Shinran, feels very appropriate for a week in which we're doing an urban retreat, because this way of practicing that I'm going to be talking about actually developed as a way for ordinary people in our ordinary lives to practice. So it's a way, I think at the time that this way of practicing developed, it was very much seen that Buddhism was for scholars, or it was for people living in monasteries, or it was for the elite. And this way that I'm going to talk about Pure Land practicing is for everybody, for ordinary people practicing in our lives, in our work, in our families, the people we live with. So yeah, a really appropriate one for the urban retreat. So we're in this theme, which is wisdom beyond words, and it started in January. So it's been going quite a long time now, and we're nearly coming to the end. Next week, Padmavajra is going to talk about a couple of figures associated with wisdom. Then we've got our final ritual, our final puja, and then we'll start a new theme. So in the theme of wisdom beyond words, we've travelled a long way in miles, to lots of different countries, and also a long period of time, going back 2,600 years to the time of the Buddha, and various times in between now and then. And we've been looking at how different Buddhist traditions attempt to put the indescribable experience of enlightenment into words or images, or maybe into sounds like mantra. Trying to communicate something of what it is to be enlightened and to help us realize it ourselves. So the Buddha was very pragmatic and practical in his teaching. What he set out to do, his mission, was to ease suffering, to do what he could to ameliorate the suffering of being a human being. He didn't set out to create a wonderful philosophical system with loads of really kind of exciting ideas or anything. He really wanted us to suffer less. So everything that you've heard during this series, however surreal it might have sounded, or challenging, or mind-bending, that has been the idea behind it, that it is helping us to suffer less. So the Buddha and other people who become enlightened, they might wake up suddenly to reality. They wake up to a reality. That's what being enlightened means. That's what the Buddha means, the awake one. And they wake up and see how things really are. And that might be gradually, or it might be suddenly. And then they want to explain that to us, the unenlightened. So that's the wisdom beyond the words that we've been talking about in the system. So they're trying to tell us something of their experience in a way that we can understand. They're trying to point to this wisdom for us. And they also try to give us methods, ways of waking ourselves up, ways of allowing reality to break through in us. And there's been a lot of different ways that it's been communicated. And as Buddhism has spread over the world, it's been communicated from very different kind of cultural conditions as well. So in this series, we've heard lots of different talks from different times in Buddhist history. We've heard from the Pali Canon, some of the earliest writings of the Buddha. So that's where we heard about things like the three Lakshanas. We've heard from the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. We've heard from the Yogacara. I'm not going to say them all, but we've heard lots of different ways. It's almost like you can say there are lots of different ways into something that we can't put into words. And last week, Pranay Hridaya started to explore how faith and the imaginal faculty, the imagination, how they're such amazing gifts, actually. Because there's something wonderful about being a human being. That means we have these gifts of the ability for faith, for confidence in the truth, and the ability for imagining a better world, a better way of being. And because we have this capacity, that is why we can become enlightened. So we can actually have a sense somehow through our faith, through our imagination, of something, of this wisdom of the enlightened. We can have a sense of this freedom of mind. And this sense can give us something. We want something bigger. We want a different way of being, a yearning. It's an impulse that makes us want to practice. And it's really important, as Pranay Hridaya talked about last week, that this faith is not contrary to reason. Shraddha, which is the Sanskrit word for faith, is the emotional counterpart to reason. In Buddhism, we really need to use the reasonable part of our minds. In fact, we need to develop it as much as we can, to think as logically as we can. But we also need to have to feel our emotions. What we understand with our intelligence, we need to feel it, because that's what gets us going. If we feel something, if we have an emotional experience, we will actually usually do something about it in a way that we won't if we just think about it. And so we do need to have the head, but we also, and the heart, but we need also all of ourselves responding to something higher, something beyond, something transcendental. So when we have these feelings, these urges, these yearnings, it's really important we act on them. Pranay and I talked last week about how we don't learn it in school. And in fact, I'd say it's like we really don't in our culture. That's not part of our culture to talk about. You know, we don't kind of come into work, if we go to work on Monday and go, this really mega experience with the moon, and then, you know, whatever it was, and it was so wonderful, and it made me really yearn for something higher, and I felt such love. Well, you might do that in some workplaces, like where I work here. We would most definitely do it. But I imagine that certainly in places I've worked before, I'd have left that a little bit out of my experience when I reported it to my colleagues. So, you know, it's part of being a human. This, you know, all humans, I think, through most time, have had some sense of there being something bigger or beyond. Whether they've called it God, whether they've called it spirits, whatever it's been called, it's part of the human condition to have this sense of there being something magical, something bigger than us. Sangha, as Pranay Hridaya said last week, Sangha, who's the founder of Triratna, he's got a phrase that you'll hear a lot. He says, this faith is the response of what is ultimate in ourselves to what is ultimate in the universe. And to Buddhists, we express that through the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. We resonate with something in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sangha. It connects with us. You know, we might come along here and we might feel what a kind of strange and motley group of people, and yet there is something in the Sangha we create together that appeals to us. We might hear something in these talks that maybe challenges us, or maybe it just sums up something we feel like we've always known, but we think, yes, I really resonate with that. Or there might be something in the image of the Buddha, maybe up at the front of the shrine, and we think something in that peacefulness or that energy that I really resonate with. So this is this faith, and leading on from the faith is this imaginal faculty. So the sense that actually there's far more going on than we can just see. And what I mean by that is that if we don't use our imaginal faculty, if we just go with the surface of things, we miss out a lot. So for instance, if we just go with the surface of things, we miss out on the fact that they are alive. You know, we can see one of the talks we had during the series, we talked about, we can see the whole universe as being alive in some way. Everything in the universe is being alive. And we miss out on understanding people if we don't connect with them imaginally. Because, you know, most people here, if they told you their life story, you'd just be amazed. You know, I mean, that's my experience. Quite often in my Buddhist life, I've heard other people's life stories. And I've just thought, wow, what people go through and what people do, it is really amazing. And they don't tend to tell you that when you first meet them, you know. And also, sometimes if people are difficult, I find people difficult. And then I find out about their lives, I just go, well, of course. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's something about this imaginal faculty which allows us to put ourselves in other people's shoes so that we can have a sense of what's going on for them, even when it's not presenting on the surface. And then, of course, the imaginal faculty it allows us to go beyond the surface of how things appear. So things may appear dead, mechanical, that's how we might talk about them, but actually there is something magical. It's the only word I can use, really, that we can contact in the world. So we're looking at how this, in this talk today, I'm just exploring more how this human ability for faith, for Shraddha, this imaginal faculty, how this has become the key practice for one form of Buddhism. So we're going to start in 12th century Japan. And that was not a great place to be. In 12th century Japan, it was like society had broken down, law had broken down, and people were really at risk from brigands and warlords. You know, lots of people fighting over things. I imagine burning down farms. It was very difficult to travel. It was not an easy place to be. There were several awful pandemics. Lots of people died, a lot of poverty. Most people were very poor and illiterate. There was Buddhism in society, but it had become for the elite, the educated, for men. Women weren't allowed to practice, to go take part in it. So it had become, you know, it's there, but it was very elite. And what we're looking at is how a Buddhist practitioner called Shinran, which I've written up on the flip chart, how Shinran communicated his understanding of wisdom and truth of reality and how to practice. And he was based in what's called the Pure Land school of Buddhism, which is practiced by many people. Shinran is one very important teacher of the Pure Land tradition. And it's a tradition that's still going really strongly today. So interestingly, in the West, we've probably heard of Zen Buddhism from Japan, but we might not have come across Pure Land Buddhism, which actually many millions of people practice Pure Land Buddhism. And it's one of the most popular forms of Buddhism in the world. It's still practiced today. And interestingly, for us, in our perspective, it might not look like Buddhism to us from the outside. So in essence, it's a tradition of entrusting to what is called other power, what we perceive as being outside of ourselves. I'm going to talk more about that later. It's all about faith and imagination. The practitioners don't meditate. They're encouraged to make no willed effort at all. See, people are kind of attracted already. Great. It is called the easy path. Why bother with all that difficult things when you can just do it the easy way? So they don't meditate. What they do is they do a practice, so they chant the Nenbutsu, it's called, and I'm going to come back to that later. So Shinran himself, he was born into this very difficult time in 12th century Japan, and he became a monk at a very early age because his parents died when he was very young, and he went into the monastery. I think he was about 9, something like that. And for 20 years, he practiced really hard. It sounds like he was he was really up for it. Do you know what I mean? He wanted enlightenment, and he put himself through all the practices, and some of those were very arduous practices indeed. There was one where you had to walk round and round a big statue for days, and you weren't allowed to sleep except for kind of leaning like this. So he did that a lot. I think he studied a lot. There was a big library at the monastery that he was in. He studied a lot. He really worked hard. But after 20 years of being really committed to his practice, he felt like he'd got nowhere. He felt like he just was no nearer to enlightenment than he'd been when he was 9 years old. And he despaired. He fell into great despair and depression. He thought, what's my life been about? I've spent 20 years doing this. It's done me no good at all. He felt really humiliated, and he felt broken. So he left the monastery where he'd been for most of his life, and he started to look for other ways of practice, sometimes actually being led by dreams that he had. This is the story. And he became involved in the Pure Land movement. So the Pure Land movement was already going in Japan, and he started following a teacher called Honen. And after some time, the rulers of Japan at that time found the Pure Land ideas threatening. So they exiled these 2 figures, Honen and Shinran, and executed several others as well. But Shinran he was banned from being a monk. He was sent to live in a very remote village, away from other monks, away from any kind of scholarship or anything like that, a fishing village. And in that village, he gave up being a monk. He married. In fact, he had 7 children. He considered himself to be neither lay nor monk. So, there was this kind of, at that time in that society, there was this division between you're either a lay person, getting on, having a family, or you were a monk living a celibate life. But he felt that he was neither of those. And that's interesting, actually, because in our Triratna order, that's something that's important to us as well, that we don't feel ourselves to be either, when we're ordained, we're neither lay nor monk. He was a very humble person, Shinran. He really didn't set out to set up some wonderful kind of new Buddhist movement. He always saw himself as a disciple of his own teacher. But what happened was the kind of teaching that he was doing to the illiterate fishing people, the farmers, was very popular. And he ended up founding this very popular and successful school of Buddhism. In fact, actually, it wasn't him, his grandson, after he died, set it up for him. But, people are still practicing this today in Japan. And what Shinran taught was that we can't transform ourselves on our own level. What we need to do is surrender ourselves to another power, to other power, that of the Buddha Amida, the Buddha of boundless, infinite light. So to understand this a bit more, I think for me, I've needed to kind of work through, what is it that I'm doing? What are we doing when we practice Buddhism? What are we trying to achieve? Because in a way, you could say there's enlightened beings, there's the Buddha and other people who've become enlightened, and they're free. They're loving, they're wise. And then there's us, there's me, full of my conditioning, my habits, often going round and round in those same kind of ruts of those petty hatreds and cravings, suffering, feeling trapped sometimes, deluded. And how do we get from one to the other? How do I get from being this kind of conditioned, deluded self to being a Buddha? So it might be helpful here to look at 3 models of how we might go about that. The 3 myths, we call them, of spiritual practice. So these are self-development, self-discovery, and self-surrender. Now, these are just myths, their way at looking at something, okay? It's a bit like, I think last week, Pranay and I talked about not getting too literal. And everything I say today, we just can't get too literal about it. It's just like, probably everything in this whole series on wisdom beyond words. If we get literal, we get in trouble. It's like we're trying to talk about something that can't be talked about. So we end up using words that just are kind of helping us to get there. And that's true of these myths. These myths are ways of looking at practice. They're not like, oh, I think today I'll do some self-development, and then, well, I mean, actually you can do that, but they're not, but I see what you mean, they're ways in. It's not, they're just ways of looking at something. What they are is they're ways of trying to understand how we might move towards being more enlightened, and all have pros and cons. So the self-development model is probably what we're very much familiar with. So that's this idea that I can do it. I can move towards enlightenment, and it's seen as a path that we travel along. We use our own willpower. We think it feels like we're using our own willpower, and we do things like we meditate, we practice ethics, we study, and it feels like I'm doing it. Okay, so that's self-development. Another model that we use is self-discovery. So that's allowing the potential for Buddhahood that we have within us to unfold. So that's the idea, it's already within me. I'm already a Buddha, I just need the right conditions to allow that to follow. And then self-surrender is where we get the self out of the way so that something bigger than us, something we experience as outside of ourselves, can transform us. So it's interesting because I'm using the words and the ideas of being in something happening inside me and something happening outside of me. And actually, the Buddha says that's a really wrong view. Because everything that we experienced is conditioned by our mind. So it's the first verses of the Dharmapada. Everything I experience created by mind. So my mind is creating the reality that I think of as being all you folks out there. So you're all conditioned by my mind. If I had a completely different set of sense organs, like if I came in as a dog here, a dog came into this room, the dog would see us all in a very different way. There'd be a lot of sense, sense smells, I imagine. It would kind of pick up all these different smells. It probably wouldn't see us in colour, I don't think. I'm not exactly sure, but you can see how a different set of sense organs means you have a different experience of the world. There's not an objective out there and an objective in there. Do you see what I mean? So just as out there is conditioned by my past, my conditioning, my body, so in here is conditioned by the outside. You are all conditioning me right now. In a very practical way, actually, because when you nod, I kind of look at you. And if everyone's got names go like this, I try and explain it. Do you see what I mean? But I mean, actually, so my experience. And I was thinking, actually, for me, it's I really enjoy giving these talks. That's because I have a sense of it's my Sheffield Sangha, lots of lovely people, I know you. If I was giving this talk in a different situation, I'd be a lot more anxious. So do you see what I mean? It's just like our past experience. My inner experience is conditioned by the outside. They are not separate. They are not separate. Now, in order for us to go about our lives as beings, we have a sense of this difference. And I imagine most animals who've got a sense of consciousness, they have a sense of there being a me and there being the rest of the world. And we need that in order to survive. It's not a bad thing to have this separate sense. The problem is when we believe it to be the only way that things are, and we identify with it. We lose the idea of the fact that actually we're all connected, we're all conditioning each other. Yes, so what what these myths are saying, actually, these three ways, actually they're all talking about the same thing, but we experience it different. We experience it as being different. Does that make sense? So whether it's self-discovery or it's self-surrender or it's I can do it, it's all the same thing, actually, but we experience it differently because we're still caught up in this, what you might call dualist way of seeing the world, that there's a difference between my inside and my outside. Yeah. So I kind of came up with a metaphor, please don't take it too literally, for the three myths, and I'm going to see if it helps. Because what happens is what we do is we have this, we feel like we're separate. We're not really separate at all. And then we try and create a castle or a fortress. Okay, we make this fortress to protect something that doesn't even exist. And because we're trying to protect something that doesn't even exist, we get really anxious about it because it's like, it's not there, I can't find it, but I need it, this sense of self-identity. So I'm going to do all I can to set up this kind of big castle or fortress that I'm going to show the world I exist separately. Okay? So what we do is to protect ourselves when we feel lonely, we feel vulnerable, we put up this big castle. And of course, sadly, it then disconnects us even more from other people. We feel even more disconnected and lonely because we've created this castle, this identity. And we decorate this castle with all these sorts of ideas like, I want my castle to look like I'm very clever, I'm always right. And then if I'm not right about something, I get a bit anxious about it. Do you see what I mean? It's like I have to protect it at all costs. So it's a bit like this castle, this fortress is protecting us. And so we decorate our castles, we try and identify them, we try and be unique as well. Now the Buddha doesn't have this castle. The Buddha is living castle free. He's just out there on the plain, completely happy, with no castle to protect him. So how do we go about, we're all, big castle, big fortress, how do we go about dismantling this castle so that we can be like the Buddha, so that we can be free and connected? Well, the first idea with self-development, that what we do then is we, the castle builder, we dismantle our castle stone by stone. This is the path of we meditate a little bit, we develop a little bit more metta, therefore we're letting a bit of the castle crumble away. We slowly take down the stones with willpower. The second one, self-discovery, it's a bit like actually within our castle, there are forces that know we don't need the castle. They're a bit like plants, a bit like those vines, a bit like buddleia that you see growing in old buildings. And even though they're only like little bits of stem, they somehow over time, a whole castle can fall down because the vines, the buddleia, whatever the plants are, have grown in it. So it's a bit like they can overcome and tear down all that stonework. And they're already in us, these plants, these seeds of Buddha nature. And what we can do in the self-discovery mode is we support them to grow wild and strong. We feed them. We want them to grow and have the castle crumble away. The third way, which is self-surrender, is that we can experience the dismantling of the castle walls as like that of an outside force. Perhaps it might be like lightning strikes the castle, or it might be an earthquake shaking everything up, or it might be more slowly, gradually, that the stones are just slowly taken away by what could be experienced as a loving external being. So that is, the three myths with this kind of a metaphor of a castle. So Shinran, he really tried the first way, the self-development way. That was him in his 20 years in the monastery, and it didn't work for him. I don't actually know what he did about the second one, the self-discovery one, but I do know that the self-surrender myth was really important to him. That's what he practiced and taught. Because what he thought was, if we try and do the self-development on, if we try and use our own ego to develop spiritually, it's counterproductive. It's pointless, because our ego, this idea of kind of trying to create this castle, it'll just appropriate any spiritual progress we might make. So we'll create a really spiritual-looking castle. It might look like a shrine ring. It might have lots of lovely Buddhas on the outside, but it'll still be a castle. And because of the appropriation that goes on. And this is called, this is the calculating mind at work. There's quite a few great Japanese words in this talk, which is interesting because normally we give you like Sanskrit words, but today it's a few Japanese ones. Test everybody at the end. So this is hakurai, which means the calculating mind, the small mind, the mind of the ego. We're manipulating the world for our own benefit all the time, manipulating other people. And there's a thing that Shinran called double-mindedness. So we can do good acts mixed with poison. So I do something and I give some money to something and I go, oh, I'm really kind. I'm great. Just gave away loads of money. And the trouble is, there's nothing wrong with giving away the money or even thinking that, but the trouble is I've just really closed down my sense of self. Do you see what I mean? I'm not open anymore. So we experience very positive states of meditation, glimpses of different conditions of consciousness, maybe. And we think, wow, I'm really special. Again, just building up the separation, a sense of ourselves, this castle, really separate from others. And actually, also going, I'm so rubbish, I can't meditate, I can't do anything, I'm just really bad at everything. That's also building up the castle. It's just a different looking castle from the outside, but it's exactly the same, I'm afraid. It's still a very strong sense of self in there. So Shinran says, we can't get out of our closed system. We can't pull ourselves out by our bootstraps. We have to do something else. So what we do, according to Shinran, is we call on the sense, this sense that we might have of there being something beyond us, bigger than us. So when we think of our faith, that yearning we might have for something, a way of living that's more beautiful, something that our imaginal faculty might communicate to us, a sense we might have, we call on that. Now, of course, it isn't really outside us. That's what I said earlier, but it feels like it's outside us. So you may or may not have had this experience, and it's completely fine if you haven't, but you may have had an experience of when you've been in difficulties and you felt like you've called on something beyond yourself. And if we're receptive, if it works for us, we can open up to that sense. And in Shinran's teaching, this reality, you could call it reality, this what's just going on in the universe, this wisdom and kindness is embodied in the figure of Amida. So Amida is the Japanese way of referring to who's also known as Amitabha or Amitayus. This is a Buddha of boundless, of infinite light, beyond space, beyond time. So Amida's not a person, they're not male or female. Interestingly, in a book that's just been written about the Pure Land way of practicing, they're like gender neutral pronouns used all the time. So the writer talks about Amitabha, but they talk about Amitabha as they, which is really interesting. So it's not this figure neither male nor female. I'm probably going to use he, actually. I apologize for that. But anyway, that's probably what I'm going to do. It's my custom. So Amida never existed in time or in place, but yet they do exist. Amida does exist. They exist in a way that they're even more real than we are in some way. To call on Amida is a bit like, for those pilgrims here, it's a bit like going on pilgrimage to connect with the Buddha. Amida emerges from this longing we have to meet the Buddha, to meet the awakening mind of the Buddha. So it's the idea that we can all meet the Buddha and his awakening, and we can all connect with the experience of the Buddha wherever we live, whatever it is we're doing, and we can do that at any moment. We can do that at any moment, whatever point in our lives we're at. So Amida is not a person, but we often represent them in statues, images. We anthropomorphize them, because that's how we can connect. Because actually, in my mind, what happens, if I start thinking about great wisdom, I think about, conditioned co-production and this great flow of conditions and like all that. It slips out of my mind. It's there, I get a sense of it, and then it slips. I can't keep connecting with it. I think some people can, it's like this is all different ways into practice, but I can't. But this idea, Amida is golden. Amitabha is often red, but Amida is golden. So this idea of this great golden figure, full of love, full of compassion, wisdom, free, full of light that's coming out to me and others. Something in me connects to that. My heart opens to that. It works for me. I feel warmth from that. So some folks might be going, literally, oh my God. Oh my God. I thought I'd come to Buddhism where there is no God. I thought this was all very rational. Well, it's really important that this figure I'm talking about, this Amida, is different from God in many ways. The two key points really are Amida is not a creator God. So Amida did not create the universe, doesn't have a plan for us, doesn't have a plan for us. Also, Amida is not omnipotent. He can't make everything happen. He lives in the world of karma, that conditioned co-production. Things arise because of the way that we act, the way that we think, and they pass away with conditions. That's what he's living in, this world of conditioned co-production, the flow of things coming into being and going out of being. He hasn't created those. So he's not God in that sense. But I would say that there is something, for me, that is godlike in him, in that he represents something very beautiful, very holy, something that I long for. And like I said earlier in the talk, I think that's a really human thing to do. And actually to have that sense of something bigger in your life, bigger than you, is really beautiful. You don't have to have it to be a Buddhist. It's completely fine not to do it. But for many people, it can be another level of practicing, another way of practicing. So Shinran said that if we call on Amida, this great figure, with faith, with real faith that he can do this, at any point, Amida's promised that we will be born in his pure land if we call on him with a pure heart. And he has promised that if we do that, we'll be born in the Pure Land. So this is all really mythical, okay? Don't get too worried again. You're thinking, what? Amida's promising that he's going to sort out me living in heaven in my next life or something. It's kind of like that, but kind of different as well. So a Pure Land is what we might think of as an alternative universe. In a Pure Land, everything that's going on helps us to practice, helps us to gain enlightenment. So you don't have to work there. There's loads of time to meditate. You don't have to worry about getting your food or your clothes or anything like that. You're born fully grown in a lotus. And the teaching of the Buddha is all about you. There's many descriptions of Pure Lands. They're full of precious jewels, full of light, trees in flower, very beautiful. But the whole point is that it's a conducive place for us to practice. So it's myth, it's story, but there's truth in myths and stories. They can mean more sometimes of reality than we can say in words. And actually, a Pure Land, well, it's interesting that I can get a taste of it sometimes. I feel like if I let go of my own self-preoccupation, my craving for things to be different, my pushing away of what I don't like, if I can just take things in as they actually are, mindful in the moment, I can get a taste of how beautiful even conventionally ugly things can be. It's like I can be in a Pure Land right now through letting go, through being receptive and open. Somewhat of a Pure Land for a while. But I think there's something about, I have had that experience of like, with the kind of clearing of my mind, things seem different. They seem more beautiful. It seems more like a Pure Land. And in this Pure Land, all other beings are actually Buddhas. So that's a lovely thing to think of as well. It's like, if we're living in a Pure Land, this is really good for people on the urban retreat, I think. It's like all those people you're meeting every day, however annoying they are, or weird, or strange, they are all Buddhas who are teaching us something all the time. Particularly those difficult people, they're teaching us something. So another teaching of Shinran is that we're all what's called bambus. A bambu. So a bambu is a foolish being. So from Amida's point of view, from reality's point of view, we're deeply foolish. It's not like we're just a bit silly, but we are deeply deluded and silly, really. We're all deeply foolish beings, and we don't know how deeply foolish we are. And actually, I love this idea. Just for some reason, I feel a sense of relief at this idea. It's like I am a conditioned being, therefore I mess up all the time. I break precepts all the time. I snap at people when I don't want to. I crave all those things. No, it's just like, do you know what I mean? My life is full of this. Of course it is. I'm a conditioned being. It's completely fine. No wonder I'm just a bamboo. It just takes a whole pressure off me. And because I'm a bamboo, really all I can do is call on Amida to help me. Now that might sound weirdly un-Buddhist actually. It's a bit like if something I call on will give me salvation. That isn't my experience of it. In a way, what Amida's representing is this greater reality, this way that things really are that we would see if we were enlightened. And you could say it's like the enlightened mind is I'm communicating in some way with a sense of the enlightened mind. And the way that we can open to Amida is by, traditionally, is by chanting what's called the Nembutsu, which literally is something like saying, I here call on or greet the Buddha. Butsu is like Japanese for Buddha. Nem is a bit like Namo, you know, when we go Namo Buddhaya, something like that. So it's like so that in this kind of relationship, when people say the Nembutsu and they call on the Buddha or Amida, there's me, the conditioned bamboo, and then there's the Buddha, the enlightened one. So it's a bit like, from my position of where I am calling on something boundless, something so big, so wise. And if you do, the way that I sometimes do this practice is that it is in those moments when I get things really badly wrong that I realise what a bamboo I am, and then I can call on something much bigger than me to help. And it sorts it out on a completely different level. So an example, and I didn't do it actually, but I wish I'd done it. That's not a very good example. Anyway, an example was, I was like, I was traveling with my mum. I know that often I get really irritable in that situation. I'd made all sorts of, very sensible and good vows about how I was not going to get irritable. I was not going to get triggered. I was not going to react. And of course I did. And in that moment, what do I need? I need something like Amida. I need this love of this bigger being because I need to do it on a completely different level. And when I have managed to do this, my experience is that things just really change. Do you see what I mean? It's like you're not trying to do it on this kind of me, trying to sort out this really deep samskara, this deep conditioning. I'm opening up to something much bigger than me to help me in that situation. It can just like give me such perspective. And interestingly, I'll just finish with, so for Shinran, what was really important is this calling on Amida. Well, it's not a response in a way. We do it from gratitude. We do it for gratitude because isn't it great that the world is organized in this way, that there is enlightenment in the world, that there is what you could call a way of being in the world, a pattern in the world, which is leading towards enlightenment, which we are calling Amida here. You might call it the Buddha, you might call it all sorts of things, but there is this pattern in the world. And that pattern in this world, in some magical way, to us as human beings, can connect with us and we can be transformed by it. Yeah, stop there.